So Dave, I guess.
Okay. So, first of all, I want to welcome everyone to joining us for this webinar. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Zain Abdullah, who's going to offer some welcome and introductory remarks before I make some announcements, and then we'll begin with our main presentation. So, Zain.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. I want to welcome everyone to our first webinar, and we're so excited to have you here. This webinar it comes as a result of our grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and which was a summer program for K through 12 educators, looking at Philadelphia as a way to understand religious freedom, religious liberty, U.S. history, and the like. So this is a webinar that we've put together in order to keep the conversation going, right, and to build on the conversation as we go forward. For this session, we will discuss how to address the topic of religion in the K through 12 classroom with Dr. Tim Hall. We're so excited to have him. He is an expert in the field, and he has a wealth of information to share with us. So we're really, really excited to have him here. My colleague Dave Kruger and I will be sort of fielding the questions for this topic. Let me just as a point of reference, please wait till the end or near the end of the lecture, of the presentation, to begin adding your questions in the Q&A. So there is a chat there, but please don't do it while the presentation is going. Please, we want you to be patient, listen to the presentation, and then place your questions in the chat. From there, we will field the questions for the Q&A session, right? So I will end here and turn it over to my colleague and executive director of the Dialogue Institute, David Kruger.
Thank you, Zain. Great to work with you on this amazing project. I'll also introduce Sage Martin. You can wave. She's part of our digital curriculum and media director here at the Dialogue Institute, and she'll be doing some work behind the scenes and sending various links along the way. So the Dialogue Institute, we were founded in 1964 by Dr. Len and Arlene Swidler, professors at Temple University, professors in the religion department at Temple University here in Philadelphia, and began as an academic journal that was really the first of its kind to advance scholarship that sought to explore the boundaries and the borders and the collaborations and connections between different religious traditions. So that journal continues to be published every 4 times a year. We were always looking for contributors for that journal. But about 10, 15 years ago, we began to develop Dr. Swidler and the board developed a nonprofit wing called the Dialogue Institute, which was meant to engage in programming related to interreligious understanding, intercultural understanding. And for a number of years, about 15 years, we had a State Department funded program to run a summer institute called Religious Diversity, Pluralism, and Democracy is essentially the theme. So we're very interested in talking about the American religious landscape, looking at cultural differences, teaching dialogue skills. We're also do a lot of dialogue training. We do training that takes place in colleges and universities. We do training that takes place in K through 12 schools in the region. And we just received a grant from the Philadelphia Funders Collaborative for the Semi-Quincentennial that will allow us to do training for tour guides in Philadelphia and to develop a digital platform that explores the topic of religious diversity and the founding of the U.S. So we're really lined up and excited for the Semi-Quincentennial coming up next year. And we would love to share more of those programs with you and invite you to participate. And I also want to mention our board chair, Majid El-Saya. He can wave. He is joining us as well and has been an avid supporter of this new branching out of programming, working with K through 12. So now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Tim Hall, a K through 12 social studies instructional coordinator for Vance County Schools in North Carolina. With over 20 years of experience as an educator and curriculum leader, he focuses on equity, inquiry, and culturally responsive instruction. He founded the Religion Matters blog and has served as past president of the North Carolina Council for Social Studies, and Vance County Coordinator for the the Council on Holocaust, and a member of the Tannenbaum Network of Inclusive Educators. His work on religious literacy, global competence, and civic education has been featured nationally. He is currently writing the book Bringing Religious Literacy to the Classroom: Global Competence for K through 12 Social Studies, published by Routledge Press, coming out next year. And just today we learned he was selected as the recipient of the 2025-26 National Council for Social Studies Religious Literacy Award, sponsored by the Core Foundation. He will receive the award in December at this national conference. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Hall to share his presentation, How to Address the Topic of Religion in the K through 12 Classroom.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. I appreciate that introduction, and glad everybody was able to come here this evening. I hope you didn't think this was the kind of webinar that you could just stand and sit there and just listen, because we definitely want some interaction in that chat box for sure. So, and I want to see that interaction. So make sure that you have your chat available, because I'll be taking some polls, we'll be getting some opinions, and you'll be diving deep into the guidelines and the framework of religious literacy education. So let's go ahead and start with the first poll question, and we'll have that question from 1, being not confident at all, being scared, very scared, to 5, being very confident. How confident are you teaching about religion in the classroom? 1, not confident at all. 5, super confident. Let's see what we got. 1, not confident at all. 5, super confident. Very good. Excellent. So we got a lot of people in the middle here. A lot of people in the middle. Some people in the 2s and 3s. Very good. So excellent. So now let's go to the next question. I think this question will interest you as well. Well, I'm going to preface this with a few directions. So I want you to think of your question. Okay. What is one question that you have teaching about religion in the classroom? I want you to type it up, but do not press enter. We're going to do a special exercise called flood the chat. It's one of my favorite when I teach online. So type up your question, but do not press enter. Give everybody a minute to think of a question that they have about teaching about religion in the classroom. But don't press enter. Don't press enter. We're going to flood the chat when I say so. Give you about 10 more seconds to get your question in. This was interactive. I warned everybody. I said it in the description. All right. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, press enter, flood the chat. There we go. Excellent. Let's see what kind of questions we got. Wow. What best strategies for civil dialogue? Don't know what to expect from various students, appropriate to teach. How do you teach religion without raising arguments between students? Take a look at these questions. These are good questions. How does one navigate distinction between teaching constitutionally and unconstitutionally? How do we teach religion in public schools? How can I make sure to understand all the details? All the details, that's a good one too. Is it acceptable to teach religion in public schools? Those are some awesome questions. And I think if you take a look at the essential questions for this session, you'll see that most of those questions will be encapsulated in those essential questions in this session. So the essential questions that I have for our session today is, what is religious literacy? Why does religious literacy matter? What guidelines should be followed when teaching about religion in the classroom? How can we effectively teach about religions? And where can we find resources for religious literacy? And I think for the most part, I think those are all the questions. But if we don't answer your question by the end, please hold off until the end and we will definitely go back to it. All right, so let's start with the first question. What does religious literacy mean to you, and why might it be important for your students? So what I want you to do, and again, this is a flood the chat moment, I want you to put in your answer to this question. What does religious literacy mean to you, and why might it be important to students? Give everybody a minute and don't press enter again until I say flood the chat. I'm one of those teachers that like interactivity in the classroom. I have to be interactive. I enjoy it. What does religious literacy mean to you, and why might it be important to students? All right, 15 more seconds. I hate to cut you short like that, but 10 more seconds and we're going to flood the chat. All right, let's flood the chat in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And some people are not listening to directions and they're not flooding the chat properly. But let's go ahead and take a look at those questions anyways. Let's see what kind of answers that we got. Ability to understand religions, excellent, excellent. Religion, understanding all religions, that's a big order. Understanding diversity of religious experiences. Religious means having knowledge of religious beliefs. Y'all are very much on target. Excellent, excellent job, everybody. So let me go to the next slide here. So what is religious literacy is a good question, because I think we have to define that first, because when you say religious literacy, some people might misinterpret it for something else, but this is a great definition. And I would start with this definition. This definition comes from the AAR, American Academy of Religion. It comes from a text called Guidelines for Teaching About Religion in K-12 Public Schools in the United States, published in 2010. Now, the AAR is a huge organization. I think it's like 10,000 strong, religious scholars from around the world, mostly in America, though, who really put this together. So what I want you to do is just very quickly, I want you to read the definition, and then in the chat, I want you to put any words that really kind of stand out to you. They really resonated with you, really caught your eye. Read the definition, and then put anything in the chat, not flooding the chat, just off the top of your head, anything that really kind of catches your eye, that really resonates with you. Ability to discern, yes. A lot of people love that one. Ability to discern. Intersections, another good one. Religious dimensions, another good one. Very good. See, one thing great about this particular definition is it combines two parts of religious literacy that we have to understand and also keep in mind. Now, I remember in the chat when we were defining religious literacy, somebody mentioned that we need to know about all the religious traditions or need to know about all the religions. Well, let me tell you, that's going to be really hard, because some religious scholars say there's up to 6,000 to 10,000 religious traditions in the world today. So for us to understand all the religious traditions, it's going to be very difficult. But if we combine a little bit of that content knowledge with the cultural competence associated in this definition, that is a good definition. It's a mixture of both. And so that's a great definition. And that's the definition that we're going to use to frame our understanding of religious literacy. So let's go on to the next slide. If I can get there. No, not there. Now we're here. So why might religious literacy be important to students? Well, I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer already, because I did. So this is from the Pew Forum in 2012. 5.7 billion people out of 7.5 billion people adhere to a religious tradition. That's a lot. So definitely our students are going to be in contact with other religious traditions, maybe ones they're not even familiar with. In addition, and I'm taking this right from the Religious Studies Companion document for the C3 framework, the National Council for Social Studies says knowledge about religions is not only the characteristic of an educated person, but it's absolutely necessary for living in a world of diversity. So our students need to have an understanding of different religious traditions. They need the content knowledge, but also that cultural competence to be able to discern and ability to understand the intersections of religion in the world today. I also like to provide 4 reasons beyond these 2 data points for teaching about religion in the classroom. And there are 3 general arguments that have been used in the past. One is the civic argument, which is, schools must have a common ground. We need to learn to respect each other on deeply held understandings. And how do you learn that? You learn that in school. The other one is a constitutional argument for teaching about religion in classrooms. Schools should remain neutral, meaning religiously neutral and neutral among religions and neutral between religion and non-religion. So constitutionally, we should teach about religion. The last one that they use quite often is students is the liberal education one. Is students should be learning from religions to gain a deeper awareness of themselves and an understanding of others. And my personal favorite, and is the one I argue the most for, is global competence. Global competence is in education for quite some time, and religious traditions kind of fold into that really well because knowledge of religions is essential as we globalize in the 21st century. An understanding of religions will allow students to interact with others successfully. So those are 4 reasons to teach about religion in the classroom. And that QR code gives you the opportunity, if you want to scan it, to be able to access that particular PDF and use it in the classroom if you want. Give you a second if you want to do that, but the slide deck will be going out after this moment in time as well. So now let's do another flood to chat. Y'all remember how flood to chat goes. Don't hit enter until I say flood to chat. So what do you think is the biggest fear for educators in teaching about religion in K-12 classrooms? 1, lack of content knowledge. 2, pushback from parents and students. 3, confusion about the separation of church and state. 4, emotional discomfort teaching religion. So put your answer, but don't hit enter until I say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Flood the chat. 2, ignorance. Yeah, there, 2. So let me say, this would be a great time for a poll, but I see a lot of 2s, a lot of 2s. 1 is a lack of content knowledge. I heard that earlier when we were asking for essential questions, but a lot of people are worried about pushback from parents and students. A lot of people worry about pushback from parents and students. And that's an understandable concern. I mean, especially when you see the news today. I mean, schools always seem to be in the crosshairs. Teachers always seem to be in the crosshairs. How can you protect yourself? So one thing I have to mention is that, there are guidelines that can be followed when teaching about the religion in the classroom. But before we go over those guidelines, let me ask you this. What's one word of advice you would give somebody to teach about religion in the classroom? Or how about this? You're in the faculty lounge, a teacher asks you, hey, I'm getting ready to teach about Hinduism. What word of advice would you give them? Go ahead and put that in the chat. What's one word of advice? My last session, they said, don't do it. But I know you're going to not say that, and you're going to say, yes, stay curious. I like that. Excellent. Good faith, yes. Excellent. What other words of advice would we give? Find if students can be a valuable source. We have to be careful about that one, but we'll talk about that soon. Teach multiple religions. Look for similarity. Listen to learn. I like that. Listen to learn. It's very good. Set expectations. Give them the introduction about religion. Excellent. Those are all good pieces of advice. Excellent. So if you didn't know, there are actually guidelines out there for us as teachers. And these guidelines come from the First Amendment Center's guidebook on religion in public education. It's titled Finding Common Ground. It was first distributed in 2001 to all the schools and districts across the nation. These guidelines have been incorporated into a variety of national documents since that time. And these guidelines are standard. You can scan the QR code if you want a copy of these guidelines, a PDF. But you can also wait until you get to slide deck and be able to access them then. And I'm just going to go over them very briefly. So, and tell me if you think that anything seems odd here. I think it all seems quite correct. Teachers should be academic, not devotional in their treatment of all religions. Teachers should only teach about the awareness of religions. Teachers should only teach about religion, not practice religion in the classroom. About is important. I always talk about teaching about religion. Teachers should educate students on the diversity of religious views, and that came up. Teachers should not promote or denigrate religions. And then finally, teachers should only inform about beliefs, not make students believe. So those are the guidelines that are well established for teaching about religion in the classroom. How many people knew that those were out there? Give me a yes, I knew those were there in the chat, if you knew those were there. See, it's just a question of knowing. And these guidelines are helpful. These guidelines are things that you can post in the classroom. And when you're teaching about religion, make sure that your students know that this is how you're going to teach about religion. And you can make sure that your kids and your students know that this is how they should talk about religion in the classroom. Of course, you have to use your curriculum and your state standards, but those guidelines are very important. So I'm going to, very good, thank you. So I want to test you, not really test you, but I want to apply these guidelines. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a few case studies, and I'm going to be, I want to be very transparent about these case studies, and I want to acknowledge some of these case studies that we're going to review today were adapted from the Institute for Curriculum Services, which developed materials from Linda K. Wertheimer's book. Hold on one second, Faith Ed. So some of these case studies come from Faith Ed. So just wanted to make sure that you're aware with that. I adapted them for this presentation. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 minutes to read each case study, and then we're going to flood the chat, and you're going to tell me which guideline do you think has been kind of, I'm going to say violated. Which guideline should be looked at in dealing with this particular case? So take a look at this case study. During a field trip to a synagogue, Rabbi offers visiting students small black kippahs to wear as a sign of respect. Students wear them briefly during the visit and return them afterward. Which guideline do you think might be in question in this particular case? All right. Let's go ahead and flood the chat. See what we got. Lots of threes, lots of threes. Yeah, I see a lot of 3 in that one. Yep, lots of 3s. You know, we should educate about religion, not practice it. And definitely there's going to be some gray area there, but a lot of 3 in that one. So you have to be very careful about that. I mean, the key issue is, does wearing a religious article as a visitor show respect for the faith community, or does it cross into religious participation? And what I would suggest here is that crosses into religious participation. So I want to mention this too. There's ways that you can prevent this from happening. And again, I did this presentation over the weekend, and somebody said, well, don't go on that field trip. And that is not the answer. The answer would be is make sure that you monitor the students very closely and make sure that they know the guidelines before you go on the field trip. All right, let's take a look at this next case study. A visit to a mosque. During a field trip to a local mosque, students are briefly separated from their teacher. When the call to prayer begins, a mosque leader invites them to observe quietly at the back of the prayer hall, wanting to be respectful. A few students join the motions of the worshipers, while others look uncomfortable. This is based on a real case study happened. Which guideline is being in question here? You can go ahead and flood the chat. Yeah, 3, 4, 3. Yeah, 3. And this one's just a simple question of guidelines as well, making sure the students understand the guidelines, making sure your chaperones understand the guidelines, making sure that your chaperones and you as a teacher are following through, because that field trip to the mosque, very important. That breaks down lots of barriers, prejudice, and discrimination when they visit those kind of sites. So that's a great field trip. But guidelines and precautions need to be in place. All right, let's go to the third case. Teacher less familiar with Hinduism invites a Hindu student and her parents to give a class presentation about their faith. While well-intentioned, the invitation places the student in the position of speaking for an entire tradition. Which guideline might be in question here? You can go ahead and answer. We don't even have to flood the chat. There's some serious thinking going on. 5. Avoid promoting. Yeah, 5. That could be it. 4. I see a lot of 4 in that one. 1, 4. Teachers should be academic. Yeah, academic, not devotional. Yeah, that pretty close to that line as well. We always have to be careful about singling out a student as the person of their faith tradition, to represent their faith tradition. You should not do that in the classroom. And even though you're asking, it seems to be a very innocent thing to do, you're really asking them to be the representative of their faith tradition. And we should not do that. So we shouldn't ask our Muslim students to say, well, this is what y'all believe, isn't it? That's not what you need to do. You should not do that. Because they, of course, do not speak for their whole tradition because of the internal diversity within that tradition. All right, let's move quickly because I only have a little bit of time left. So case 4, Buddhist meditation. When the class studies Buddhism, a student volunteers to lead a short meditation using a singing bowl and a Buddha statue. Participation is optional, but all students are present in the room. Where do we think, what guideline is in question here? Yes, 3. This is very close to practicing, even though the student volunteered. And that's this is definitely a practice. And this is not something we should do. Y'all are doing great. You're really applying those guidelines. All right, this is another great one. Again, all of these are actual cases. Christian dogma. A middle school teacher invites a local pastor to speak about Christianity during the presentation. The pastor states, only those who believe in Jesus will be saved, and that others will go to hell. Which one do we think, which guideline is in question here? 4, 6, promoting, denigrating, inform, not trying to make students believe. Very good. We should be academic, not devotional. Number 1, I see that. I mean, the question is, does the presentation provide academic learning or promote a particular belief system? At this point, it's promoting a belief system. All right, last one, and then you have it down pat. Women in Islam. This is a case as well. To help students understand cultural diversity, a teacher brings in various veils and head coverings worn by Muslim women and allows students to try them on. Some students enjoy the experience, others feel uncomfortable. Which one's in question? 5. Avoid promoting, denigrating. 3, educating, not practicing. That one, and that one hit the news. That would happen in Texas. That one hit the news. But see, had these teachers only understood these guidelines, would they have made these same decisions? I would say no. It's knowing the guidelines and be able to use those guidelines as you teach about religion. So my suggestion to you is to make sure that you get these guidelines, use these guidelines, and make sure that your students are informed by these guidelines as well. And of course, it's always dependent on your parent base, on your families, but you're welcome to send these guidelines home and tell your parents, this is how I teach about religion in the classroom, to make sure that they're aware that you are being academic in your approach. And I apologize. I suffered allergy attacks all day, so I am losing my voice. So slowly but surely. So how can we effectively teach about religions? That is a great question. That came up earlier as well. And so one way that we shouldn't teach about religions is when we use the world religions paradigm. And I'm guilty of this one too. I mean, the world religions paradigm means typically we teach about the big five, meaning Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. It's usually separated from the curriculum, a unit on its own, a chapter by itself. And there's lots of charts. A founder, scripture, beliefs, doctrine. I'm guilty of it. I remember giving out a graphic organizer and had them fill it out and felt like I was teaching about religion. But there's problems with that world religious paradigm. First of all, it reflects a 19th century Western Protestant influence focused on doctrine and private sphere. There's the absence of dynamics of power. It's also a world religious paradigm was also created during a time period of colonialism, rationalism, and male-dominated scholarship. So there are a lot of voices not being heard. And so it leads to this idea of monoliths or isms, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. And then students feel like they can identify those traditions as being a monolith. That's not what we need. What we need is lived religion. I mean, lived religion could be defined simply as how people practice religion in their daily lives, not in the textbook. Okay? So, and Henry Goldschmidt is a friend of mine from the Interfaith Center of New York. He said it so well. Lived religion, in short, the study of lived religion takes an analysis of religious diversity out of the rarefied realm of doctrine and text and places it instead within the give and take of a multicultural public sphere. We can't study religion in textbooks and assume that our students are going to recognize those religions outside the textbook in the real world. So how do you do that, you might ask? Guess what? There's already a framework in place. It comes from the Religious Studies Companion Document for the C3 framework. How many people in this chat know about the C3 framework by the National Council for Social Studies? Give me a thumbs up or a yes, I do in the chat. Also to make sure that you're still there. Anybody? Wow. Yep. All right. Danielle, thank you. Thank you. A C3 framework. C3 framework was created by the National Council for Social Studies in 2013. It really kind of focuses on conceptual ideas and provides a framework for standards across the nation. And many states from across the nation use it. They decided, once they published out that C3 framework for social studies, they realized that they didn't add religious studies. And so they created the Religious Studies Companion Document for the C3 framework in 2017. It provides us a framework for understanding lived religion. And you're welcome to, again with the QR code or later with the slide deck, get a copy of the 6-point framework for teaching about religion in the classroom. This is found in the C3 framework for religious studies companion document. So I'm just going to very briefly go over while you're taking a look at. So the 6-point framework for teaching about religion in a classroom works like this. First of all religions are internally diverse. Okay? So you can't say all Muslims believe this, all Christians believe this, all Buddhists believe this. There's internal diversity within every tradition. All religious traditions are dynamic and changing throughout history. Christianity from the 7th century is not the Christianity that you see today. There's differences. In addition, all religious traditions are embedded within the cultures that they are at. They take from that culture, but they also give back to that culture as well. So it's a give and take. So that comes from the cultural studies framework. And then for the next bit, the 3 B's, beliefs. All people have religious beliefs ranging from theology and doctrine that affect their daily lives. Those beliefs also affect their behaviors, and behaviors can include rites, rituals, and habits and practices. They affect their beliefs, but also affect their belonging. And belonging means, of course, different communities of co-religionists that you belong to, whether it's a super church, small local church, small local community group. And your belonging to those different groups affects your behaviors and your beliefs. And that's the 3 B's. It's very simple. And if you teach the 6-point framework, and you don't have to teach it all at one time, but if you teach the 6-point framework, you really help students understand a lived religion that they can recognize when they go outside into the real world, when they're rid of the textbook. So it's very important for us to work with this 6-point framework, not all at one time, although you can, but work with it individually and remind students each religious tradition has internal diversity. Each religion is dynamic and changing. So being able to have them understand that. So let's take a few case studies and take a look and see if you can guess which part of the framework this case matches. See who's got it. All right. So when teaching about Islam, a teacher includes examples of Sunni, Shia, and Sufi traditions and highlights cultural variations. Students analyze how geography and history shape different practices within the same faith. Now, looking at that 6-point framework, which point do you think teaching this would match? 1, 1, 1. Yeah, very good. Everybody's doing really good. Excellent. Yes, that's 1. I made that one easy because it started at the beginning. Wanted y'all make sure that y'all got it. All right, excellent. Y'all did great with that one. All right, so now they're not going around clockwise. They're mixed up. Let's see if we can get the next one. So students analyze how dietary practices such as kosher, halal, and fasting reflect religious commitments and community belonging. They discuss how similar values, discipline, and gratitude appear in secular texts too. Which one do you think this one is most associated with? 5, 5, 5. 5. I should do flood the chat because somebody votes 5. You get 2 people to vote 5. Everybody starts throwing in on the 5s. 6, belonging. So although 5 is pretty close, this one would be considered belonging at this point. I'm sure somebody would argue with me on that, but that's okay. It'd be good for students to argue about that too, because that means they're getting deep into the framework. All right, let's take a look at case 3. A geography class explores how Buddhist architecture and temple placement reflect environmental and cultural values in Southeast Asia. Students map temples and analyze regional variations. Where do you see this one? I see 2 threes. Anybody else? 3. I'm going to do a flood the chat on the next one so we don't get everybody, that showing you how democracy works sometimes. 3, 6, Nathan, that's interesting. All right, for those of you who voted 3, embedded, that's what that is, because you can see those variations of those cultures on that. All right, case 4. All right, we're going to flood the chat on this one. I'm not going to have anybody vote until we do it all at once. A sociology teacher uses oral histories from local residents about congregational life during the civil rights movement. Students identify how faith communities mobilize social action and belonging. Don't press enter. I think Chris already did. Darn. All right, flood the chat. What we got? Excellent. Y'all are thinking about good, good. Excellent. So the answer that I have is belonging for this one, but it might be behaviors as well. So I could see both of those. All right, number 5 in World History Unit, students examine how Protestant Reformation transformed Christian beliefs and practices, then compare that to modern movements like liberation theology or digital worship spaces. What do we see here? Yes, I see that. That too. That too. Very good. Excellent. All right, last one. A history class explores how Quaker beliefs about equality influenced early abolitionist movements. Students trace how religious convictions shaped social reform without promoting any single faith. What do we see here? Very good. Yep. See you. Number 4. A lot of 4, a lot of beliefs. But again, this is where your students could really dig deep into it, start to really think about it, and start really working with that framework and start thinking about belonging, behaviors, beliefs, embedded, dynamic, and changing internal diversity. In fact, I have a graphic organizer, just like I did back in the day, except now it has lived religion. I have a graphic organizer. You're welcome to scan the QR code, get access to, or use the slide deck to use. And you're welcome to use this in the classroom. And what I've done in the past is I've taken like the graphic novel Miss Marvel and have had students read sections of Miss Marvel and be able to match up where that put examples of internal diversity and dynamic and changing in the graphic organizer from that text. But there's other things that you could do too. There's also, I was just thinking about this, we're not going to do this now because we're running out of time, but I mean, we could take a look at the All Blacks, a case study on the All Blacks and New Zealand rugby and the Maori. And you could read that, have students read that case study and fill out that graphic organizer and seeing that framework at work. So getting close to the end of my time. So where can we find resources for religious literacy? That is the best question. Of course, there are a lot of different areas, and I want to see what resources you have tried. So anybody want to put in the chat where they have gone for resources on religious literacy? Nobody. That's okay. Textbooks. Hey, textbooks is a good place to start. Your state standards are a great place to start too. Textbooks are a good place to start, although I say textbooks are limited on how they treat religious literacy education. So I would also suggest, the National Constitution's there. Yes, they have some great resources, especially on First Amendment cases. So here's some great classroom resources for teaching about religion. The Pluralism Project is a great spot. They have a variety of religious one-pagers for you in the classroom that you can use. Harvard Divinity School, Religion and Public Life, has a great website that provides those case studies, like the case study I just had the slide before, Townbaum. Center for Interreligious Understanding provides lesson plans, lots of curricula options. The Religious Worlds of New York, which has been running for many years, had collected from participants all the lessons of those participants and placed them on the website. Another great place for sources for religious literacy education. And you might not know of this one, but how many people use Crash Course in the classroom? I love Crash Course. A big fan of Crash Course. Yep, Religion for Breakfast. That's a great one. And then Crash Course Religions. Crash Course just did this year a series on religions, and it is awesome. It is really well done. And of course, then there's Religion for Breakfast. So all of those are great options for you to get resources to teach about religion in the classroom. So here's what I charge you with. I want you in the next day or two, review some of your past lessons that include religion, either explicitly or implicitly, and think about what changes you will implement based on your professional learning from this webinar. That's a good question. We'll get back to it. Thank you, Christopher. So, essential questions. I hope that we are able to answer your essential questions today. What is religious literacy? Why does religious literacy matter? What guidelines should be followed? How can we effectively teach about religion? And where can we find resources for religious literacy? So let's go back to that Likert scale. How confident are you teaching about religion in the classroom now? 1, being not very confident at all. 5, being very confident. Put it in the chat where you're at. 4.5. I like that. Anybody else? 4. Yeah, we're moving the needle. We're moving the needle, David. We're trying to move the needle. 3.5. Thank you, Jacqueline. Excellent. So I definitely want to encourage you to make sure that you go back to the slide deck, review it, get the resources from it. My contact information, if you ever want to reach out to me. Of course, I have a webpage called religionmatters.org. We post blogs from all teachers all across the nation about teaching about religion in the classroom. I also have social media sites. Religion Matter 5, it's supposed to look like an S. Religion Matters was taken. And you're welcome to follow those. You can scan that QR code to access all of that. I publish stuff on religious literacy on a regular basis. And then, of course, next year, I have a book coming out with Rutledge, Eye on Education, Bringing Religious Literacy to the Classroom, Global Competence for K-12 Social Studies. And there are my references, my appendix, and that is it. Thank you all very much for staying to the end of this presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hall. We just appreciate how interactive this was and you inviting us all to participate and to come along. Zane, we have a good amount of time here for some Q&A.
Yeah, we sure do. So please, you can, I think, I mean, the group is small enough where we could sort of, unless there are questions already there, we could just ask people to maybe raise their hand or something like that. I'm not really sure how you want to do it.
So I'll mention, I did see that Christopher Johnson had a question about resources accessible to deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind students, perhaps translated to the American Sign Language. Christopher, I'm going to have to say, I don't see that. I really don't, and I'm very sorry to say accessibility is a difficult thing. Of course, religious literacy curricula is difficult to find, and definitely we need to improve upon accessibility, not only for that population, but also for Spanish population as well. Just a lot of different religious traditions need to be told in a variety of language traditions, and that has not been the case. So sorry about that, Christopher. I will look though.
Yeah.
So Tim, I have a question that I could just present to you. So I'm thinking about religious studies, which is more of an academic approach to understanding religious diversity, as opposed to those who believe their religion is linked to sacred history. So there's this idea between sort of sacred history and genuine history. In other words, how do you approach a student who says, no, my religion does not change? It is divinely revealed. It's been the same since its beginning. So a student might feel uncomfortable with even discussing their religion as a part of historical change. How do you get a student to understand your approach without offending them?
That is a very good question. And I didn't put this in one of my slides because of the short time. So there's a thing that I call bracketing. Okay. And so this is what I do before we talk about religion in the classroom. Of course, we go over the guidelines and all that. But then I say, okay, now everybody, I want to make sure that we're aware that whatever tradition you come from, that you bracket your tradition, put it in brackets, and put it over to the side. So we can just see this situation, this tradition, for what it is. So we keep your tradition safe over here in the brackets. So we can just look at this tradition. And the other one, and this is one used for children's literature, there's a way, so in children's literature, they use windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. And so the windows gives you the opportunity to see into other cultures, religious traditions. Mirrors allow you to see some of yourself within that tradition. And then sliding glass doors, which you can't use, allows you to step into that tradition. And because we're talking about religion, we don't use the sliding glass doors because we don't want anybody to step into that tradition because that would be a violation of one of our guidelines. So we only talk about religious traditions, windows and mirrors. Windows into somebody's culture, religious tradition, mirrors to see part of yourself in that tradition or things that mirror your tradition.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Can I just piggyback on that just quickly? Others have an approach where they try to allow students to have empathy with others. And this is why a teacher might say, well, I want you to try on this kippah. I want you to try on the scarf. I want you to see how it feels. I want you to enter into that space. So would you explain why is that so wrong?
Well, so going back to that windows and mirrors, you definitely want them to have that empathy. So you are trying to develop that empathy through the windows and mirrors. But the sliding glass doors, that sliding glass door, when you start saying, here, I'll put on the kippah, then you're actually participating in that tradition. Maybe you don't feel like you're participating, but you are participating in some way. And so that is against one of our guidelines where you're teaching about religion, not practicing a religion.
Okay.
So you have to really kind of be aware. You just have to be cognizant of those guidelines. If you use those guidelines in the classroom, you're going to be in good shape. Guidelines, and let me say this to all the teachers here, guidelines, make sure you're teaching your prescribed curricula as defined by your district or school and your standards. Okay. And then use those guidelines and you will be on safe ground.
Okay. What's becoming popular is students who are trying out, for instance, the fast of Ramadan. It's become very popular on college campuses where they would invite other students to try fasting for a day, see how it feels. Would that also be something that you would discourage?
I would. So here's what I'd say. As a teacher, I would not encourage that at all. If people are doing that on their own and outside the class, that is entirely up to them, of course. But in the classroom, I'm not going to say, okay, let's all do a fast.
Right.
And so we can feel the empathy. Because again, I am getting close to sliding glass door.
Okay, thank you so much. So Tim, do you want to just look at what there are only a few in the chat. The person could actually
Magid has his hand up. Why don't we go question?
Okay.
So I don't have a question, but Dr. Zane, I wanted to answer your question about encouraging a non-Muslim to fast or not. So I'm I'm at the University of Pennsylvania at their Office of Religious and Ethnic Interests, and it was Ramadan last March, and I was working with a group of Jewish students, and they were curious about breaking the fast. And one of them said, "I've never been to a breaking of the fast." I said, "Well, why don't you come with me, and we'll go attend, but don't feel any pressure. On the other hand, if you feel comfortable, maybe you want to participate not by fasting, but by serving the food to those who are fasting." And he ended up really getting a great experience by being there, seeing them break the fast, but also serving them. He felt, I'm doing something for those who are hungry and fasting, and it's something he took back to tell his group how much he got out of that. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think that's a very good point about the field trips. Like when I had mentioned the field trips, and we had did one of the case studies over the last weekend. One of the teachers was like, I know how to solve that problem. Don't ever go on field trips. and honestly, that's I mean, understanding where we're at, sometimes you're like, well, don't go on field trips. And there are some people, Diane Moore actually, who says don't go on field trips. Field trips are not to be done. But Henry Goldschmidt really believes in those field trips. And I, like Henry, think there's some benefit, a lot of benefit to that, because students get used to that. They see that it becomes demystified to them, and so it breaks down those barriers for them. And can they learn, like going to a mosque? Will students be able to understand everything going on in a mosque or in a Catholic mass? No, they won't at all. But they will have that experience that will really break down those barriers of discrimination, prejudice, and just those barriers that they're going to have about learning about another tradition, or being in contact with those people from those traditions, because they're like, oh, yeah, I understand. Very good point.
So I had a curious question about, you gave the example, I think it was a Protestant pastor, evangelical pastor going into a school and kind of talking about like, this is, I believe that this, unless you accept Christ, this is your eternal destiny. Talking about that kind of thing, speaking out of their own conviction. And it sounded like in the example, it could be problematic to bring a person advocating for a particular religious tradition into the classroom. But I'm wondering, are there ways to kind of like hear the perspectives of religious people coming from whatever perspective they have? Is there still that space to kind of like hear from the practitioners themselves, as far as kind of understanding how they're conveying their own understanding of their tradition, even though we may not agree with that position? If you could.
So good question. So first of all, I'll say the whole thing about guest speakers, that's an area of controversy as well.
Yeah.
So kind of like the field trips, there are some people say yes, field trips. Some people say no. Same with guest speakers. Some people say yes, some people say no. I will say yes. You can have guest speakers, but they need to know the guidelines, and they need to know that they can't teach for their religion. Okay. So remember, we teach about religion. We're not teaching for a religion. And so if they're coming in there and doing like preaching, and that becomes problematic. They're really going to have to approach it academically, and they need to be very aware of those guidelines to teach it academically. Now in higher ed, that's different for sure. So yeah. I definitely understand where you're coming from, but in higher ed, but in K-12 public education, that's not acceptable.
It's different power dynamics than
the power dynamics are very different. Yeah. And not only that, going back to earlier when we were talking about teacher concerns, parent pushback would be big.
So Tim, there's a question by Aaron Peabody that says, do laws that require putting up the 10 commandments in the classrooms violate the presentation?
My presentation?
I'm not really sure.
My presentation?
Does Aaron want to, I see Aaron is there. If not,
Aaron, yeah. So Yes, my presentation. So pointing up the 10 commandments, the way they're suggesting I'm pointing up to 10 commandments probably violates the Constitution. And the way the Supreme Court had ruled earlier on the 10 commandments in classrooms, it did violate the Constitution. Having the 10 commandments up in classrooms with other sacred traditions and their laws in a historical context, there's nothing wrong with that. But in this case, if a state is trying to say, we're just going to put up 10 commandments in every classroom, again, the Supreme Court had ruled previously that that was unconstitutional. So I'm going to stick with the previous ruling until that ruling is overturned. And I know that they're trying that in Texas, I think in Louisiana and Oklahoma at this point, maybe. I'm not sure, but I mean, those things will have to go through through the test of the Supreme Court. That's a good question. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
Any other questions? You can actually unmute yourself and present it, or you can put it in the chat. Nathan, you want to?
First of all, thank you so much for the talk. That was fantastic. And I QR code all the links. It's going to be great reading for later on. I think you kind of went over this already, so forgive me if I'm repeating a little bit of the info you gave. I'm going on a field trip next month with my students, and part of the trip, if I choose to go, is actually inside part of a church. And just in general, do you have any advice on how I could prep my students for going into a religious site, or any just advice in general about that trip? I'm still kind of back and forth on if we're going to do it, but I think I'd really like to, because there's something inside social studies oriented that I would like them to see.
Okay. Well, so first off, I would, this is me being me, and I don't know your context, but I can tell you what, I was a principal. So I do have a teacher's hat, principal's hat, coordinator's hat. So first of all, I make sure that all your parents understood that you were going to be on that field trip. I would make sure that they understood those guidelines. I make sure your students understood those guidelines. And then also I make sure it was connected to your standards and your curriculum. Okay. And then be sure that you have chaperones who understand exactly where you're going to be too. If you can check off all those things off the list, I think it'd be very successful. Again, back to those cases that we looked at previously, those could have been solved. They wouldn't ever hit the news had they just made sure to provide the guidelines and had enough chaperones to keep the students going and not have them do that. That would have all been avoided. And so, Nathan, you can avoid all that by, making sure. And then if you do send the parent letter home, make sure you connect it to the standards and the curricula, and make sure that they understand you're welcome to use that lived religion tradition, kind of quote or something like that, and the importance of it. But yeah, definitely.
So Tim, how would you handle explaining various religious holidays in the classroom, especially those that are not as widely recognized? So you have various smaller religions, and they want to be recognized for acknowledging certain kinds of, let's say, prophetic events or something, or practices. And that's one part of the question. The other part is, what about practices that need to go on throughout the day, like Muslims making prayer 5 times a day? How do you handle students who need to leave the classroom, make their prayer, and then come back to the classroom? So how should the teacher navigate that kind of space?
Well, I mean, the first one I'll go with the second one first. So the second one, that one's easy enough. I mean, we need to provide religious accommodations to our students. That is something that we need to do with all, I forget the terminology, what they call it, but with all, as much as you possibly can, you need to provide those religious accommodations. So that is definitely important. And then as far as the holidays go, there's a variety of ways to do it. I would first suggest that we should not have our contact with different religious traditions just through holidays. So So we shouldn't only think about the Jewish tradition when we talk about Hanukkah and the Holocaust. We should understand the Jewish tradition throughout the year and encounter it throughout the year. And same with other traditions as well. So, and if you have a hard time doing that, then there's also ways that you can take a, create a calendar, put it on a bulletin board, and then start tracking the different holidays on the bulletin board as well. And if you have some question about where that bulletin board can be found or where those holidays can be found, the Harvard Divinity School has one of the best multi-faith calendars that you can incorporate into the classroom. And then you can highlight those different cultures and their holidays as you go through the year. And you can do that through picture books. I know that's not just, I know that sounds very like an elementary activity, but picture books work wonders for high school as well. You can use picture books, you can use videos, just so that they encounter those different traditions at those holidays. But again, I would suggest let's work on incorporating those traditions throughout the year. So again, I use Judaism as my example. We don't just encounter that with the Holocaust and with Hanukkah, because we should encounter it more so throughout the year.
Okay. So this might be a question that is for the higher ed classroom. I'm not really sure, but do you ever encounter an issue where you need to define religion versus cultural practices? In other words, some people might see a religion or just have it described as more cultural than religious, right? And these days, more people are recognizing spirituality rather than quote unquote religion. And so how do you handle that sort of thing?
So honestly, so I remember actually when we were talking about the slide deck, and I think you had to question what is religion or something like that. And I remember a story by Soren Kierkegaard where he talks about what is religion, and somebody asked a famous Greek philosopher, what is religion? And he says, well, come back to me in another 15 minutes. And they come back to him 15 minutes, come back to me another week, I'll tell you the answer. And there is no answer for what is religion. So I try to really avoid those kind of questions. What I tried to do is, like, if we're talking about a religious tradition and somebody mentions baseball and say, can that be a religion? It's like, well, there are some similarities, windows and mirrors. So think about that. So I can't answer the question, is that a religion, or is Jediism a religion? Because it is in Britain. It's registered as one.
Right.
So, I can't answer that question. So I just kind of stay on the cultural stuff.
Okay.
That's a good question.
And in my classes, sometimes we talk about the difference between, let's say, especially if we're talking about Taoism, Confucianism, the difference between sort of philosophy and theology, right? And so, I mean, is it just a matter of terminology? Is it a matter of how the West defines the other?
I think there's a lot of that involved there, because I think when again, going back to that early influence of the 19th century, when you have Western Protestant scholars who are defining what religion is, defining what Hinduism is, and when they start defining what Hinduism is, and then they bring it back, now we have people in the Hindu tradition saying we need to decolonize our tradition and our own understanding of the tradition. So yeah, I think that's a lot. Even with like Taoism, Confucianism, I mean, definitely we think about it as philosophy, but if you go to China and see how it's being practiced, you see a lot of behaviors too, a lot of behaviors, and they're all mixed. So it's very interesting. So yeah, I forget. Yeah, it's getting late and the allergy medicine is kicking in. But yeah, I'd be careful on making our students think about religions in those Western Protestant labels. And I'll go back to Soren Kierkegaard, my philosopher of choice. If you label me, you negate me.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Tim. We're gonna go to another question, but I just wanted to kind of have this conversation about the complexity of religion itself. In other words, yeah, I mean, it's nice to have slides and put things in nice boxes and that sort of thing, but we also need to realize how complicated it is how slippery it gets as well.
I think definitely using that 6-point framework, students will get that. And I think that's a good shift from that world religions paradigm where they do think in the box. Right. So that internal diversity and that embeddedness and you know, that changing over time, and that cultural studies approach that you find in that 6-point framework, I think you'll see that. Now, Aaron has a question, I see. Do you allow students to comment on religions? Students want to share or provide a personal context. Yeah, so I do not, yeah, but again, of course, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, if they're going to express themselves about the religious tradition and you're talking about religious tradition and they say, hey, you know, I just wanted to share that I did this and it's associated with the religious tradition. Yes, of course, let them share. I mean, that's a lived experience. They're sharing it. What I would say, Aaron, is never put them up to sharing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they're sharing it on their own, yes. Another thing, and this didn't come up in one of our case studies, but it's one that I should address, is if you use those guidelines early and often and get students used to those guidelines, it will prevent situations where some students will start degrading religion before you're even talking about it. Like they, you know, somebody starts talking, oh, I saw this on South Park about this religious tradition, and starts really denigrating that religion. You know, so get those guidelines, work with those guidelines, make sure your students are aware of the guidelines, and then when you're teaching about religions, make sure you let the students put their religious tradition in brackets and put it aside.
So I'm going to jump in and suggest that we make a couple of wrap-up comments on behalf of the Dialogue Institute, and then we can turn the camera off and then maybe stay on for another few minutes in case somebody would like to raise a question, and out of privacy, they just would prefer not to be on camera. So at this point, I would ask if Sage, if you wouldn't mind putting the Google Form survey in the chat to make it available for those folks who are interested in, well, we would love to have all of you fill out the survey just because it helps us to kind of think through what types of programming you all would find useful and helpful and the good work that you all are doing as educators. But secondly, if you would like to walk away from participation in this session with, as we mentioned, a certificate that would give you 1.5 contact hours, and Dr. Hall suggested that's a good framework that tends to be a transferable category in different school systems across the country. So 1.5 contact hours is what we'll be putting on the certificate. So we're asking all of you, if you're willing, to fill out the survey, and then we can give you a certificate that you can use for your own purposes and certifications. So I think at this point, Zane, unless you have any kind of final comments while we're recording, we can shift to just some informal conversation as we wrap up for the evening. Any last words for the recording, Dr. Hall or Zane?
No, I've spoken enough.
Okay. And you've spoken well.
Yes, absolutely. No, I just want to thank everyone for their participation, their patience, and I think we've learned a lot from Dr.
Yes.
Hall. I think it seems as though Dr. Hall, you mentioned our teachers more confident. I think everyone can say that they have a bit more confidence in the way they're thinking through this thing, because as you said, I mean, it's not really about sort of just being automatically prepared after hearing a webinar, but I think you've given us a lot to think about, right? And I think that even is more important. You've given us, I think, places to go to think about religion, religious resources, and that sort of thing. I'd just like to thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And again, I just want to encourage everyone, please don't forget the survey, take your time with it. And also you'll come away with a handy certificate for your participation. And we appreciate everything you want to offer as well.
And we do appreciate all the work that you are doing. We know that this can be